how do I begin and where do I begin? Because it's an extremely, it's an extreme honor that I am here and talking to you. Some of the members here, an extremely august gathering. So it's a mixed experience. I'm a bit nervous and extremely happy because it's probably the first platform where I'm able to share ideas or experiences that I've been experiencing in 15 or 16 years of my journalism career. But let me start with a few disclaimers. I'm not an award-winning journalist in that sense. I mean, I'm doing my part as a chronicler of the time that every reporter is be, and that's what I am all, that's what my work is all about. 1995, 94, 95, when I was a student, I was an absolute failure. I couldn't clear my graduation examination. It took me 5 attempts to clear the graduation examinations, and I was like any other bewildered student what to do next. And that's where accidentally I thought that probably being a journalist is something that suits me. It is one profession where you are in sync or in touch with your society closely, and it kind of reverberated my own passions of looking beyond classroom education. But while doing my post-graduation in journalism, I was again confused. What should I be doing as a journalist? That's when one of my faculty members gifted me a book which is on your screen. Everybody loves a good drought. And I must say that this book changed me and my career. It has been written by Mr. P. Sainath, one of India's frontline chroniclers of our time. He's one of the best commentators on poverty and hunger and development issues. And Sainath was to later become my mentor and guide and friend. But 2-3 things in this book actually changed me as a journalist. One is, do you look at events? Do you cover events, happenings around you? Or do you cover processes that lead to certain events? This book actually set that confusion to rest. I thought events per se don't lead you to anything. It is the process that leads you to a particular thing. In 2000, I got first opportunity to really look at one of the processes that define our society today, which is development-induced displacement. Through that one full year of 2001, I traveled across the country looking at different projects, from dams to thermal power plants to special economic zones, which were not then, but later they came up. But the one query that I had then was, what happens to people who are displaced by development projects? Where do they go? How do they live? What happens to them? That query took me around the country, and while I was traveling in 2001, I was also looking at another process. One process was leading me to another process, which was, I was seeing huge amount of migration from the countryside to the cities. Nagpur, our own city, in that particular year, there were hundreds of people, hundreds of migrant laborers coming from all over central India, all over North India to construct roads. And I was, out of curiosity, I was interviewing them on the roads. Where have you come from? Someone said, I've come from Balaghat, just the neighboring district. Others told me they've come from Andhra Pradesh. Many others came from Odisha. And I decided to travel with them back to their villages. That was the another process which took me into the hinterland and heartland of the country. And that's when I realized that the real issue is not migration, it's not really displacement. It is land, it is water, it is forests, it is all those natural resources, the commons, community commons, which are increasingly being monopolized or cornered or commercialized or or being transformed into commodities. Around the same time that I read this book, and the following 4 years, I was also following Sainath's writings in the Hindu. He was writing about a wave of suicides among cotton farmers in Andhra Pradesh. I was traveling in central India, particularly this region of Vidarbha, and I was seeing that what he was reporting in Andhra was also happening around me. It was happening 100 miles away from Nagpur, it was happening 50 miles away from Nagpur, it was happening all around. I remember 1998, I was assigned a story when I was a cub reporter in a paper I was working for. And I was assigned to do a story in a small cotton town of Yavatmal, in fact a village near Yavatmal, where a farmer had committed suicide. I went there, I reported about the suicide, the tragedy of suicide, and came back and filed the story. But over the next 2-3 years, I kept reading, reporting on suicides here and there, all farmers. In a week, there would be 3 suicides. In another week, there would be 4 suicides. It was like a wave of suicides taking place. In some villages, one farmer commits suicide, and then another commits suicide. And this became kind of a wave. It became a process unto itself. I wonder what would happen if 250,000 people were to die or were killed in some sort of a bomb attack or a nuclear attack. Nuclear explosion takes place, some country goes and bombs another country, another nation, and kills 250,000 people. What would happen? I think there would be another world war. There would be a collapse of probably the global governance system. But that precisely is the number of farmers who have committed suicide in this very country around us between 1995 and 2010. I have 2 pictures, 2 slides. One is to the left is Marutrao Dhoke, whose wife Baby committed suicide last year. To your right is Jyoti Deshmukh. This household lost all 3 men, the father, his elder son, and his younger son. There are women farmers committing suicide. There are male farmers committing suicide. And this story doesn't become the kind of media priority that it should be. And therefore, I felt that while the rest of the media is taking a look at what is happening in the top 5 or top 10% of our population, extreme prosperity, shining India, I thought, let me also take a look at how the bottom 10 are performing. That's where the process of covering suicides pitch in. I started looking at suicides as events, but eventually, over the last 7-8 years, I've tried looking at it as a process. Ultimately, what drives you to commit suicide? Why is a farmer committing suicide? No one would like to end his life, his or her life, for no reason. In the last 7-8 years of my career as a reporter, the process of covering suicides has actually led me to understand tremendous amount of processes, tremendous amount of changes that are taking place in our countryside, in our hinterland and heartland. And that is one of the arguments that I'm making today on this platform. That the change, the big change in this, that India is changing, yes, India is changing at a rapid speed, at a speed we had never seen before. But this change is also happening around us. Probably we are not aware of it. The only problem that I see is that the change is top to down. I mean, there are policy issues, there are programs that are happening at the global level and then at the national level, and those policies and programs are driving changes at the local level. That's the problem with the change I see. I think the change is to be driven by the local communities, people who are stakeholders at the local level, your ambitions, my ambitions, within the resources and the talent pool that is available, and then drive those changes from bottom to top. That's the opportunity that I see through covering suicides. Why do I cover suicide? To me, this change and this process is important because globally, biggest change and biggest processes are happening around farm sector and food industry as a whole. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, in its very recent report, actually acknowledges that fact that small farmers who are dependent on rain, they are in crisis globally. 60 to 70% of our farming is rain-fed. 70% of our farmers are extremely, extremely small farmers, 2 hectares, that's the optimum land holding. So what is a global challenge is also really our very local challenge. Reporting a story like this, a story that is happening in the heartland, in the hinterland of Vidarbha, is actually a global story. I mean, today the journalists talk about fashion shows in Mumbai. Just an hour's flight from Bombay, in our region, a cotton farmer commits suicide. The two extremes really is what the story is. The story is not about death. It's about the life. It's about how millions and millions of our farm households are actually surviving. If they're not, 250 of them have committed suicide, but millions of them are living in the similar way. They haven't committed suicide, but their economic and social situation is no different from those who have quit this world. It is their story. To me, the story is also the context in which it is unfolding. I think any story won't make sense unless you explain the context in which it is happening. Is that on one hand, you have fashion shows where 250 or 300 journalists scramble for space every year, and hundreds of cotton farmers kill themselves in central India. I think the context, therefore, is the tremendous amount of inequality that has come to stay as our reality today. We have probably a sub-Saharan Africa and Times Square in the same state or the same country. There are 50 billionaires who are kind of hogging the limelight every year. Their combined worth more than the combined worth of the GDP of all the states put together. And then there are about 800 million Indians, most of them small and marginal farmers, who are living on rupees 32 a day, as the Planning Commission of India would make us to believe, which is a fact. To me, I think the story is this inequality, which also drives the socio-political and cultural changes from top to bottom. Inequality also kind of breeds a mindset where you start saying, my friends have argued with me on umpteen number of times that farmers like Marutrao Dhoke or farmers like Santosh Deshmukh who killed themselves, are absolutely, they don't know how to farm. I mean, one bureaucrat also, a couple of years, he argued with me that farmers commit suicide because their families get rupees 1 lakh in compensation. All of rupees 1 lakh in compensation, the bureaucrat was saying, he was arguing, a very top bureaucrat was arguing, your farmers commit suicide because they get this, their families get this 1 lakh rupees compensation. What sort of sensitivity, what sort of mindset would it need to kind of argue this case? But there are these arguments. I mean, there are arguments that probably we need to change our cropping systems. Probably we need to, build or open sectors for the commercial exploitation or the commercialization of agriculture sector. There are many different arguments in place, but the central theme is, how do you make a small farm viable and sustainable in an era where every single thing has been transformed into commodity? In cities, you see, a husband is earning, a wife is earning, and yet they are unable to cope with the inflationary economy that we have come to stay in. In the same economy, which is extremely energy intensive, which is extremely, which is integrated with the global markets, we are asking our small, marginal, and extremely vulnerable farmers to not just compete with a farmer sitting, say, in Iowa, a subsidized farmer in Iowa or a subsidized farmer in China. We are asking him to compete with that farmer with no energy, with no economic input. How do you transform 55 to 60 million households is really the story. So therefore, covering the inequality is really the context in which, inequality is really the context in which the farm crisis is unfolding. That is what I see. Is there what do I see beyond that? Is there no hope in the season of despair, or is it only a sad story? I think there are many good and bad things happening. Suicide is a tragic story, but people also do fight back. They also have resilient ways to cope with not just suicide or migration. There are people, there are innovators in rural India. There are farmers who will try out new things, try out new combination, try new cropping systems. Extremely resilient ways. I was looking at an interesting trend in Andhra Pradesh, where a group of farmers are trying to preserve their native seeds when there is an onslaught of commercial markets in the sector. One farmer on a small plot of 2 acres or 3 acres trying to grow 70 to 80 different native crops, right from ragi to bajra to sorghum. They are trying to, it's not clinging on to the old, but they are trying to preserve their traditions. They are trying to see whether with sustainable cropping patterns in the face of the onslaught of the cash crops, whether they are able to sustain their livelihoods, even if the income is small. They are trying to fight out the indebtedness. They are trying to also fight the onslaught of urbanization. I see these processes, many different processes. Aparna Malikar, for instance, she is a widow who was on Kaun Banega Crorepati KBC show, our own Indian version of who wants to become a billionaire. Aparna Malikar is farming her 15-acre plot in which she has done away with cotton as a cash crop. She's trying to see if a small water body can be built. From that, can she bring back some of the food crops? When the food crop comes back, can she sustain some amount of livestock which sustains her, which gives her allied income. It's an extremely brilliant story. She has 2 daughters. Her husband committed suicide about 4 years ago. He consumed poison and wrote a letter to addressing the chief minister saying, I'm not getting good price to cotton. In this price, I can't survive. Please improve your support prices. Please support the farmers. With that letter, he committed suicide. My friends tell me that there are many things, there are many good things to report as a journalist. Why don't you move to Mumbai? Why don't you move to Delhi and report maybe on Bollywood or business? What makes me stick to stories of agrarian change is, as I said, the 70% of the agrarian masses will define this country in the coming decade and the decades to come. So it is extremely important to also look at the changes in the rural areas as a journalist, trying to chronicle the big changes of our time. I'm reminded of a story that Sainath once told me, and that actually is one driving point which keeps me driving back to the rural India. It's the story about Roman Empire Nero. I hope you have heard that story before as well. But Nero burnt Rome. Tacitus, the historian and the official of his empire, has written about it, but Tacitus is silent on one aspect which Sainath writes in one of his essays. Nero burnt Rome and then built a huge palace. I mean, he was also known for throwing up a party, opening his garden for that spectacle, for his palace, and setting aflame human beings because there were no lights. So to keep the palace illuminated, he was burning the human beings. Tacitus writes about it, but Tacitus is silent on one aspect, which I think really is the point that I'm trying to drive home today, is what sort of sensibility will it require for the guests of Nero to kind of join that party and throw a fig into your mouth. Setting humans aflame by Nero is one thing, but being his guests, there were many mad people who came after Nero. To me, the essence is these guests who could go to Nero's party and while that singing and dancing went on, they were enjoying the party even as the human beings were set aflame. I think there would be different ways of addressing crisis like this agrarian crisis. There are many ways you can argue about the approach that you want to take. But there can be no denying the fact that there has to be a consensus that let's not play at least the Nero's guests. Thank you.